Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never should have taken the shortcut through Vickery Hollow. It was late October of 2019, and I was driving home from my grandmother's funeral in southern Ohio. The GPS said the main highway was backed up for miles due to a jackknifed semi, so I followed a detour through a stretch of rural roads I'd never seen before. The kind of roads that don't show up on most maps, the kind that twist through dying farmland and forgotten towns where the streetlights stopped working decades ago. I'm 34 now, but that night aged me in ways I still can't fully explain. The town appeared out of nowhere. Just a cluster of old buildings pressed against the road, like they were trying to escape the surrounding woods. A faded sign read, "Welcome to Vickery Hollow, population 412." But the numbers had been scratched out, and someone had spray painted something underneath that I couldn't quite make out in the dark. It was nearly midnight, and my gas tank was hovering just above empty. The only light I could see came from a small general store at the edge of the main drag, its windows glowing yellow like jaundiced eyes. I pulled in, grateful for any sign of life. The store was run by an older woman with deep-set eyes and hands that never stopped moving. She didn't say hello when I walked in, just watched me from behind the counter, her fingers tapping a rhythm on the register. I grabbed a bottle of water and asked if there was a gas station nearby. She pointed down the road without a word, then added something that made me pause. "Don't stop anywhere else. Don't talk to anyone. Just get your gas and leave." I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. But her expression didn't change. I paid for the water and left, feeling her eyes on my back the entire way to my car. The gas station was another quarter-mile down, tucked behind an overgrown lot. It looked abandoned at first, but the pumps were lit, and a single attendant sat in a plastic chair by the door. He was young, maybe early 20s, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. I filled up and went inside to pay. The kid barely acknowledged me. I asked if there was a faster way back to the highway, and he just shook his head. "Only one way out of here," he said. "Same way you came in." Something about his voice felt rehearsed, like he'd said those exact words 100 times before. I got back in my car and started driving, but the road didn't look the same. The turns felt wrong. The trees seemed closer, leaning in like they were listening. I checked my phone, but I had no signal. The GPS kept recalculating, spinning in circles like it was just as lost as I was. After what felt like an hour, I saw the same sign again. "Welcome to Vickery Hollow." I'd been driving in a straight line, but somehow I was back where I started. My heart began to pound. I turned around and drove faster, pushing 70 on a road that was barely meant for 40. The sign appeared again, this time on the opposite side of the road, like the town had flipped itself just to mock me. I pulled over, breathing hard, trying to calm down. That's when I noticed the lights in the field beside me. Dozens of them, small and flickering, spread out in a wide circle. At first I thought they were fireflies, but fireflies don't glow orange, and they don't move in unison like that. They were lanterns, and the people holding them were walking toward the road. I didn't wait to see what they wanted. I floored the gas and drove straight through, ignoring every instinct that told me to turn back. The road finally opened up, and I saw the highway ahead, glowing with the lights of passing trucks. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was 10 miles out. When I finally did, there was nothing behind me but darkness. No sign, no lights, no town. Just empty road stretching back into black. I drove straight home, didn't stop once, didn't even pull over to sleep. The next morning, I searched for Vickery Hollow online. I found nothing. No records, no photos, no mention anywhere. I called my grandmother's neighbor, who'd lived in that part of Ohio her whole life, and asked if she'd ever heard of it. She went quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "People around here don't talk about that place. And if you made it out, you shouldn't either." I never did find out what those lights were or why the road kept looping me back. But sometimes, late at night, I catch myself checking my gas gauge even when it's full, just to make sure I never have a reason to stop somewhere I don't recognize. The house on Miller Road had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. I grew up 3 streets over, in a small town in Kansas, where nothing much ever happened. We moved there when I was 7, and by the time I was 12, the abandoned house had become a fixture of local legend. Kids said it was haunted. Adults said it was just structurally unsound and waiting to be demolished. But no one ever went inside, and no one ever seemed to know who owned it. The windows were boarded up, the front porch sagged in the middle, and the yard had long since been swallowed by weeds. I'm 29 now, but what happened when I was 16 still wakes me up some nights. My best friend at the time, Danny, was the kind of kid who lived for dares. One night, during the summer before junior year, he convinced me and 2 other guys, Levi and Marcus, to sneak into the Miller Road house. We brought flashlights, a crowbar, and a cheap camera Danny had borrowed from his older brother. The idea was simple. Go in, look around, take some pictures, get out. Danny wanted to post them online and prove once and for all that the place was just a rotting old house. Nothing more. We climbed through a window on the side of the house, the one with the loosest boards, and dropped into what used to be a living room. The smell hit us first, damp and thick, like something had been left to rot for years. The floors creaked with every step, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper that curled like dead skin. We split up, which looking back was the stupidest thing we could have done. Danny and Marcus went upstairs. Levi and I stayed on the first floor, checking the kitchen and what looked like a study. The study was mostly empty, just an old desk, a broken chair, and a pile of newspapers so yellowed they crumbled when I touched them. But in the corner, half hidden under a tarp, was something that made me freeze. It was a door. Not a closet door, not a bathroom door. A door set into the floor, with a rusted metal handle and a padlock that had been cut clean through. Levi saw it too. We looked at each other, and without saying a word, we both knew we weren't going to open it. But before we could leave, we heard Danny scream. Not a joke scream, not a prank scream. A real, terrified scream that echoed through the whole house. We ran for the stairs, flashlights bouncing off the walls. When we got to the second floor, Danny was standing in the hallway, pale as paper, pointing at one of the bedrooms. Marcus was behind him, shaking so hard he could barely speak. Inside the room, lying on a bare mattress, was a man. He was old, thin, dressed in clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in months. His eyes were open, but he wasn't moving. For a second, I thought he was dead. Then he blinked. Slowly, like it took all his strength. He didn't say anything. He just stared at us, his mouth twitching like he was trying to form words, but couldn't remember how. We ran, all 4 of us, down the stairs, out the window, across the yard, and didn't stop until we were 3 blocks away. Danny called the police from a payphone, and they sent a car out to check. But when they got there, they said the house was empty. No man, no mattress, nothing but dust and broken furniture. They didn't believe us. Nobody did. The story became a joke, something people brought up at parties to embarrass us. But I know what I saw. That man was real. And he wasn't just living in that house. He was waiting. For what, I still don't know. A few months later, the house burned down. The fire department said it was faulty wiring, but there was no electricity in that building. It had been cut off for years. I drove past the lot a few years ago just to see what was there now. Nothing. just an empty square of dirt where the house used to be. But standing at the edge of the lot, half hidden by overgrown grass, was a metal handle. The same handle from the door in the floor. I didn't stop to look closer. I just kept driving. I work as a delivery driver in rural Tennessee, and most of my routes take me through areas where cell service doesn't exist, and the nearest neighbor might be 5 miles away. I've done this job for nearly 7 years now, and I've had plenty of strange encounters. Dogs that seem too smart. Customers who never answer but leave instructions taped to their doors. Houses that don't match the addresses on my manifest. But nothing prepared me for what happened last March, on a route I'd driven at least 50 times before. The package was for a woman named Edith Grable, who lived at the end of a long dirt road that cut through about 2 miles of forest. I'd delivered to her before, always during the day. She was elderly, kind, and usually had a plate of cookies waiting on the porch. This time, though, my route was running late. By the time I reached her road, the sun had already set, and the trees on either side were so thick they blocked out whatever moonlight was left. I turned on my high beams and kept going, figuring I'd drop the package, snap a delivery photo, and be on my way. But when I got to the house, something was wrong. The porch light was off, the windows were dark, and sitting on the front steps, completely still, was a figure I didn't recognize. It wasn't Edith. It was a man, thin and tall, wearing what looked like a mechanic's jumpsuit. He didn't move when my headlights hit him. He just sat there, hands on his knees, staring straight ahead. I honked once, thinking maybe he was a relative or a handyman who hadn't heard me pull up. He didn't react. I honked again. Nothing. I sat there for a full minute, trying to decide what to do. The smart thing would have been to leave, mark the delivery as undeliverable, and come back the next day. But something made me get out of the truck. Maybe I was worried about Edith. Maybe I was just too stubborn to admit I was scared. I grabbed the package and started walking toward the porch, keeping my flashlight aimed at the man the whole time. As I got closer, I could see more details. His clothes were filthy, covered in what looked like oil or mud. His hair was matted, and his face, when the light finally hit it, was completely blank. Not angry, not confused, just empty, like there was nothing behind his eyes at all. I stopped about 10 feet away and called out, asking if Edith was home. He didn't answer. He didn't even blink. I set the package down on the bottom step, took the photo, and backed away slowly. The whole time he just sat there, watching me without really seeing me. I got back in my truck and drove away as fast as the dirt road would allow. The next day I called the company and asked them to check on Edith. They sent another driver out, and he reported that she was fine. Said she'd been at a doctor's appointment the night before and hadn't gotten home until late. When I asked about the man on her porch, he said there was no one there. No man, no muddy footprints, nothing out of place. I've driven that route a dozen times since then, and I've never seen the man again. But every time I turn onto that dirt road after dark, I slow down a little, just in case. And every time I get to Edith's house, I check the porch before I get out. I don't know who that man was, or why he was there, or if he was even real. All I know is that something about his face still haunts me. The way he looked at me without looking, the way he sat so perfectly still, like he'd been waiting there for years. My grandmother passed away in the spring of 2021, and I inherited her house in a small town in West Virginia. I'd spent summers there as a kid, running through the backyard, catching fireflies, listening to her tell stories on the porch. The house was old, but full of memories, and even though I lived 3 states away, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. I decided to fix it up instead, spend a few weekends here and there making repairs, maybe rent it out eventually. That was the plan anyway. The first few visits were fine. I cleaned out the attic, repainted the kitchen, replaced some rotting boards on the porch. The work was slow but satisfying. and being in that house made me feel close to her again. But on my fourth visit, something changed. I arrived on a Friday evening, just as the sun was going down. The house was dark, which wasn't unusual. I always turned off the breakers when I left to save on electricity. But when I walked inside, I noticed something strange. The kitchen light was on, not flickering, not dim, fully on, like someone had flipped the switch minutes before I arrived. I checked the breaker box, and sure enough, it was still off. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Then I heard footsteps, not outside, upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone was walking from one end of the hallway to the other. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox and crept toward the stairs. The footsteps stopped. I waited, heart pounding, but there was nothing. Just silence. I searched the whole house, every room, every closet, even the basement. Empty. No signs of a break-in, no open windows, nothing disturbed. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, old wood expanding and contracting in the evening chill. But that night, lying in my grandmother's old bed, I heard it again. Footsteps, directly above me, crossing the attic floor. This time, they didn't stop. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, watching the ceiling, waiting for something to happen. By morning, I was exhausted and shaken, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. Houses make noises. Old houses make a lot of noises. I went up to the attic to prove to myself there was nothing there. And at first, there wasn't. Just boxes, old furniture, Christmas decorations I remembered from childhood. But in the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of crates, was something I'd never seen before. A small wooden chest, locked with a rusted padlock. I broke the lock with a screwdriver and opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. All of people I didn't recognize. Men, women, children, standing in front of houses, sitting on porches, posing in fields. They were old, black and white. Some so faded I could barely make out the faces. But on the back of each one, written in my grandmother's handwriting, was a single word. Gone. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to find out. I put the photographs back, closed the chest, and left the attic. That night, the footsteps came again, louder this time, more insistent. And just before dawn, I heard something else. A voice, faint and distant, calling my name from somewhere inside the walls. I left the next morning and haven't been back since. The house is still sitting there, empty, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if whatever's inside it is waiting too. I moved to a small town in Oklahoma about 3 years ago, after my company relocated its headquarters. The town was quiet, affordable, and everyone seemed friendly enough. I rented a house on the outskirts, close to the edge of a state forest, and settled into a routine pretty quickly. Work, gym, groceries, sleep. Nothing exciting, but nothing bad either. That changed the first time I saw the woman in the woods. It was a Saturday morning, and I was out for a jog on one of the trails that ran behind my property. The trail was well marked, mostly flat, and I'd run it dozens of times without incident. But that day, about a mile in, I saw someone standing just off the path. A woman, maybe 60 or 70, wearing a long gray dress that looked like something out of another century. She was facing away from me, completely still. Her head tilted slightly like she was listening to something. I slowed down, not wanting to startle her. I called out a greeting, asked if she was okay. She didn't respond. She didn't even move. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do, then decided to keep going. When I looked back a few seconds later, she was gone. I didn't think much of it at first. People wander into the woods all the time. and maybe she was just a local I hadn't met yet. But the next weekend, I saw her again. Same spot, same dress, same posture. This time, I stopped and walked toward her, close enough that I could see the texture of her clothing, the way her hair hung loose and tangled down her back. I called out again, louder this time. Still nothing. I reached out to touch her shoulder, and the second my fingers made contact, she vanished. Not walked away. Not faded slowly. Just vanished, like she'd never been there at all. I ran back to my house and didn't leave for the rest of the day. I told myself it was a trick of the light, some kind of optical illusion caused by the shadows and the trees. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't normal. Over the next few months, I saw her 3 more times, always in the same spot, always facing away, always disappearing the moment I got too close. I started avoiding that part of the trail, taking longer routes just to stay away from her. But then, one night, she showed up somewhere else. I was sitting on my back porch, drinking a beer and watching the sun go down, when I saw her standing at the edge of my yard. Same dress, same posture, same blank stillness. But this time, she was facing me. I couldn't see her face clearly. Just the outline of it, the dark hollows where her eyes should have been. She stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. Then, slowly, she raised one hand and pointed at my house. Not at me, at the house itself, like she was marking it for something. I went inside, locked every door, and didn't sleep until the sun came up. The next morning, she was gone. But on the back door, scratched into the wood in long, jagged lines, was a single word. Soon. I moved out a week later. I don't know what she was, or what she wanted, or why she chose me. All I know is that some things don't need explanations. They just need distance. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, the kind of place where everyone goes to the same church, shops at the same grocery store, and knows each other's business whether you want them to or not. It was a safe place to grow up, predictable, maybe even boring. But there was one thing about that town that never sat right with me. The Carver family. They lived at the end of our street in a house that was always a little too dark, a little too quiet. The father, Eugene Carver, worked at the lumber mill and rarely spoke to anyone. The mother, Dolores, was seen even less. And their son, Simon, was in my grade at school, though he barely talked and never made eye contact. People whispered about them, the way small-town people do, but no one ever said anything directly. That was the rule. You didn't ask about the Carvers. You didn't visit their house. And you definitely didn't go into their backyard. I broke that rule when I was 14. It was a dare, of course. The kind of stupid thing kids do when they're trying to impress each other. My friend Tyler bet me $5 I wouldn't climb the fence and touch the old shed in the Carvers' backyard. It seemed easy enough. The shed was maybe 20 feet from the fence, and the family never seemed to be home. I waited until dusk, when the shadows were thick enough to hide me, and climbed over. The yard was overgrown, full of weeds and broken lawn furniture. The shed itself was small, rusted, with a padlock on the door that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I crossed the yard quickly, touched the shed, and turned to leave. That's when I saw Simon. He was standing at the back door of the house watching me. Not angry, not scared, just watching, with that same blank expression he always had. I froze, waiting for him to yell or run inside and get his parents. But he didn't. He just raised one finger to his lips, like he was telling me to be quiet. Then he pointed at the shed. Not at me. At the shed itself, like he wanted me to look at something. I shook my head and backed toward the fence. I didn't want to know what was in there. I didn't want anything to do with that family. I climbed back over and ran home, and I never told anyone what happened. A few years later, The Carvers moved away. No one knew where they went. The house sat empty for a while, then was bought by a young couple from out of state. They tore down the shed during renovations, and according to local gossip, they found something underneath it. The rumors varied, depending on who you asked. Some said it was animal bones. Others said it was something worse. The official story was that it was just old junk, buried and forgotten. But I remember the way Simon looked at me that night, the way he pointed at that shed like he was trying to warn me. And I remember the way his father looked at me across the street the next morning, with eyes that saw right through me. Whatever was in that shed, Simon wanted someone to know. And whatever it was, his family made sure no one ever would. The cabin we rented that summer was supposed to be a getaway. My wife and I had been going through a rough patch, the kind that builds slowly over years of small disappointments and unspoken resentments. A friend recommended a place in northern Minnesota, way off the grid, where we could disconnect and focus on each other. The listing looked perfect. A small cabin on a private lake, no neighbors for miles, surrounded by nothing but trees and water. We booked it for 2 weeks and drove up in early August, hopeful that the quiet would help us find our way back to each other. The first few days were good. We hiked, swam, cooked meals together, talked more than we had in months. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a wood-burning stove and a porch that overlooked the lake. At night, we'd sit outside and watch the stars, the kind of stars you can't see in the city, thick and bright and endless. It felt like healing. Then, on the 4th night, I saw the light. It was across the lake, flickering through the trees on the far shore. At first, I thought it was a campfire, maybe another cabin I hadn't noticed before. But it didn't move like a fire. It pulsed, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. I pointed it out to my wife, and she said it was probably just a reflection, moonlight bouncing off the water. But the moon was behind us, and the light was too bright, too focused to be a reflection. I watched it for nearly an hour before it finally went out. The next night, it was back, and the night after that, always in the same spot, always pulsing with that same rhythm. On the 6th night, I decided to investigate. I told my wife I was going for a walk, grabbed a flashlight, and started around the lake. The trail was rough, overgrown in places, and it took me nearly an hour to reach the far shore. But when I got there, there was nothing. No cabin, no campfire, no sign that anyone had ever been there. Just trees, darkness, and silence. I stood there for a long time, shining my flashlight into the woods, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. I walked back to the cabin, confused and unsettled. My wife was asleep when I got home, and I didn't wake her. But that night, I dreamed of the light. In the dream, I followed it deeper into the woods, past the trees, past the shore, into a clearing where a figure stood waiting for me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it watching me, the way you feel eyes on you in a dark room. When I woke up, my wife was standing at the window, staring out at the lake. She didn't turn around when I called her name. She just pointed at the far shore and whispered, "It's closer tonight." I looked, and she was right. The light was there again, but now it was halfway across the lake, hovering just above the water. We left the next morning. I don't know what that light was, and I don't want to know. Some things are better left unexplained. Better left behind in the places where they belong. We never talked about that trip again, and we never went back to Minnesota. But sometimes, late at night, when my wife is asleep and the house is quiet, I see that light in my dreams. And every time, it's a little closer. I was 17 when I took the night shift at the gas station on Route 9. It was the summer before my senior year, and I needed money for a car. The station was old, one of those places that time forgot, with flickering fluorescent lights and a bell that chimed every time someone opened the door. Most nights were uneventful. A few truckers, some late-night travelers, the occasional drunk wandering in for cigarettes. But there was one night that changed everything. One night I still can't explain, no matter how many times I've tried. It was around 2 a.m., dead quiet. Not a single car on the road. I was behind the counter, half asleep, scrolling through my phone, when the bell chimed. I looked up and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, thin, dressed in a suit that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, blocking the door, staring. I asked if I could help him, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. He just kept staring, his head tilted slightly to one side, like he was studying me. I reached for the phone under the counter, ready to call the police. But before I could pick it up, he spoke. His voice was low, raspy, like he hadn't used it in years. He said, "You're not supposed to be here." I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't want to find out. I told him to leave, that I was calling the cops. He smiled, a thin, joyless smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he turned and walked out, disappearing into the darkness like he'd never been there at all. I called the police anyway, and they sent a car to check the area. They didn't find anyone. No man in a suit, no footprints, nothing. The officer told me I was probably just tired, that working nights can mess with your head. I wanted to believe him, but the next morning, when I was locking up at the end of my shift, I found something on the ground outside the door. A business card, old and yellowed, with a name printed on it that I didn't recognize. But on the back, written in faded ink, were 5 words that still haunt me. "I'll be back for you." I quit that job the next week and never worked another night shift again. I don't know who that man was, or what he wanted, or why he chose me. All I know is that some warnings are meant to be taken seriously, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. It was a few years after that gas station job that I started noticing how certain places don't just fade out of your memory, the way other jobs do. Most of my teenage years blurred together the way they're supposed to. Classes, friends, awkward dates, the constant push and pull of wanting to be grown and still being a kid. But that night shift, that man in the doorway, the card on the ground, that stayed sharp, like a splinter you can't work out, small enough to ignore most days, but deep enough to ache when you least expect it. I tried to move on the normal way. I went to community college. I got a better job. I moved out of my parents' place and into a small apartment with a roommate who played video games too loud and cooked ramen like it was gourmet. My life filled up with new routines and new worries, and for a while, it worked. Then I started seeing him again, not clearly at first, just the sense of a shape where there shouldn't be one. A tall figure at the end of a grocery store aisle when the store was almost empty. A man in a suit standing under a streetlight across the road when I took my trash out late. Each time I blinked or looked directly, there was nothing. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, my brain making patterns out of shadows. But the feeling was always the same. That cold pinch between my shoulder blades. That certainty that whatever I'd seen wasn't random. It was aimed. The first time I knew it wasn't in my head was when my roommate, Troy, saw it too. We were coming back from a late movie. It had been one of those cheap weekday showings where you basically have the whole theater to yourself, and we'd joked the entire drive home about how the monster in the film wasn't half as creepy as the guy who'd taken our tickets. We pulled into our apartment complex at around 1:30 a.m., headlights washing over the parked cars and the small strip of grass between the lot and the building. That's when Troy went quiet. "Dude," he said, voice low. I followed his gaze. Standing near the mailboxes, under the one flickering lamp that never worked right, was a man in a dirty suit. Tall, thin, pale. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there like he'd been placed in the scene. I couldn't see his face clearly from that distance. But I knew. I knew the way you know the sound of your own name in a crowd. We both sat there in the car with the engine running, staring. The man didn't wave, didn't move. He just waited. Troy swallowed. Should we call someone? I tried to speak. My throat felt tight. Just drive past him, I said. We did. Slow, careful, like we were passing a loose dog that might decide to bite. The man didn't turn his head as we went by, but the second our headlights cleared him, I saw it in the rearview mirror. He was looking at us now. Not at the car. At me. We parked. We walked fast to the stairwell. Troy kept glancing behind us. I didn't. I didn't want to give that thing the satisfaction of seeing me look scared. When we got inside, we locked the door and double-checked the windows, like that would mean anything. Troy tried to laugh it off. Probably some drunk guy, maybe homeless. But his eyes didn't match his words. That night, I woke up to Troy shaking my shoulder. "Someone's outside," he whispered. I rolled over, still half asleep, and heard it. A slow knock, not on the door, on the window beside my bed. Knock, knock, knock. The rhythm was wrong, too patient, too deliberate. I didn't move. I couldn't. I lay there with my eyes wide open, staring at the curtain like it might lift on its own. Troy stood behind me, his breath shaky. Then the knocking stopped. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. It was our apartment door, taken from the hallway. The peephole centered in the frame, the number on the door visible. Under the photo, one line of text. "You're still here." I sat up so fast my head spun. Troy leaned in, saw the screen, and went pale. "What is that?" he whispered. I didn't answer, because I didn't have one. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, Troy went to the leasing office and asked if anyone had been messing around. The manager shrugged, said they'd had some vandalism but nothing major. No one matched the description. No cameras had caught anything. And when Troy asked if anyone had complained about someone lurking by the mailboxes, the manager gave him a look that said he should stop asking questions if he didn't want to sound crazy. That afternoon, Troy packed a bag and told me he was staying with his girlfriend for a while. "It's not you," he said, standing in the doorway with his backpack slung over one shoulder. I don't like this. Whatever it is." I wanted to tell him it was nothing. I wanted to make a joke, to take the weight out of the room. But I couldn't. Because it wasn't nothing. It had never been nothing. After he left, the apartment felt too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat, and it sounds like footsteps. I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to Route 9. The gas station was still there, still half broken, still lit with those flickering lights that made everything look sickly. I drove there in the middle of the day, hoping daylight would make it feel normal again. Hoping I'd walk inside and find a different attendant, a new manager, a fresh coat of paint, anything that would prove time had moved on. It hadn't. The bell chimed when I opened the door. The same sound, sharp and thin. The air inside smelled like old coffee and stale cigarettes. Behind the counter was the same guy who'd worked there with me during my last summer. His name was Curtis. He was older now, heavier around the middle, but his eyes were the same, tired and wary. When he saw me, he frowned like he was trying to place my face. "It's me," I said. "We worked together. Back in—" "Yeah," he cut in, voice low. "I know who you are." That made my stomach sink. I stepped closer. "Do you remember that night? The guy in the suit?" Curtis didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the security camera above the register. the one that never worked right. Then he leaned forward. "Don't talk about that in here," he said. My mouth went dry. "So you do remember." He exhaled slowly like he'd been holding that breath for years. "Everybody remembers," he said. "That's the problem." I asked him what he meant, but he shook his head. "You shouldn't have come back." "I need to know," I said. He's showing up again." I thought it was over. Curtis stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his expression that I hadn't seen back when we were kids. Not skepticism, not annoyance. Fear. Real fear. Buried deep. "He doesn't stop," Curtis said. "Not once he notices you." "Who is he?" Curtis wet his lips. "We don't know, not really. But there's a story. An old one. My granddad used to tell it when I was a kid. Said there's a man who doesn't belong to any town, any county. He just attaches himself. Like a tick. You see him, and then he sees you." My skin prickled. "That's ridiculous." Curtis gave a humorless laugh. "Yeah, that's what I said too. Then I started working nights here. Then I saw him. Then my cousin saw him. Then my cousin stopped answering his phone one day, and nobody ever found him." The room tilted. I grabbed the counter edge to steady myself. Curtis lowered his voice further. "You still got the card?" I hesitated. I did. I'd kept it in an old wallet, tucked in the back of a drawer like it was evidence, like it could prove I hadn't imagined it. I nodded. Curtis's eyes tightened. "Don't keep it." "It's just paper." "Not to him," Curtis said. "That's how he knows you're holding on to it. That's how he knows you're still open." I didn't know what to say to that. My mind wanted to reject it. But my body, the part of me that listened to instincts, knew Curtis believed every word. "How do I make him stop?" I asked. Curtis stared at me like the answer tasted bad. "You don't. Not really. You just try to not feed it." "Feed it?" "Fear, attention, talking about him, looking for him. You do all that. You're basically turning on a porch light and leaving meat on the steps." I swallowed. "So what? I just pretend it's not happening." Curtis's gaze flicked to the door. "You leave," he said. "You move. You don't go out at night. You don't answer unknown numbers. And if you ever see him standing somewhere, you don't walk toward him. You don't confront him. You don't do anything that makes him think you're participating." I wanted to argue. I wanted something practical. A police report, a restraining order, a name. But deep down, I knew those things were jokes in a situation like this. You can't file paperwork against something that doesn't follow normal rules. I left the station with a knot in my stomach. On the drive back, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see that pale face hovering in the back seat. I didn't. But the silence in the car felt crowded anyway. That night, I did what Curtis told me not to do. I took out the card. It was in my drawer, tucked beneath old receipts and expired gift cards. I held it under the kitchen light. The edges were worn. The paper had a slight bend, like it had been handled too much. The words on the back were still there, faded but legible. "I'll be back for you." I stared at it until my eyes burned. Then I did something I thought would fix everything. Something simple. Something final. I tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper was loud in the quiet apartment. I tore it again, and again, until it was nothing but scraps. Then I carried the pieces to the sink and ran water over them, watching the ink bleed and dissolve. I ground them into pulp with my fingers, like I could erase the threat that way. When I was done, I threw the wet mess into the trash and took the bag straight outside to the dumpster. I didn't even bother tying it. I just wanted it gone. As I walked back toward the building, I felt it. That familiar cold pressure between my shoulder blades. I looked up. He was standing at the top of the stairs, right outside my apartment door. Not a shadow at the edge of the lot. Not a shape under a flickering lamp. Clear and solid and too close. My legs locked. I couldn't breathe. The man in the suit looked worse up close. His clothes were stained, his collar crooked. His tie hanging like it had been pulled loose by rough hands. His skin was pale in a way that didn't look human, almost waxy, like he'd been kept in a cold place for too long. His eyes were dark, not black exactly, but so deep they didn't catch the light, like holes punched into his face. He tilted his head slightly, the same way he had at the gas station. And then, in that raspy voice, he spoke. You tore it. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He took one slow step forward. I told you, he said, voice calm, almost patient. Doors don't close. I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the curb. I fell hard onto the pavement, palms scraping. Pain shot up my arm, but it barely registered. The man didn't rush me. He didn't need to. He just kept walking, one step at a time, like this was inevitable. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I fumbled it out with shaking hands. Unknown number. A single message. Look up. I did, because my body obeyed before my mind could stop it. The man was only a few feet away now. He lifted one hand slowly, and I saw that his fingers were stained dark at the tips, like ink, like old bruises, like rot. He pointed at my apartment door. Go on, he said. Open it. I shook my head, finally finding my voice. No, his expression didn't change, but the air seemed to thicken. The night felt suddenly quieter, like the entire complex had stopped breathing. You already did, he said. I didn't understand what he meant until I heard the lock click behind him. My apartment door, the door I'd locked before taking the trash out, was turning from the inside. Slowly, like someone was opening it. There was no one in there. There couldn't be. Troy was gone. I was standing outside. The place should have been empty, but the door kept opening. A thin slice of darkness appeared between the door and the frame. Cold air spilled out, carrying that same smell I remembered from the gas station. Old dust, stale metal, something like damp paper. The man in the suit didn't look at the door. He just watched me. Some doors, he said softly, don't lead where you think. I scrambled backward on my hands and feet, not caring how I looked, not caring if someone saw. I needed distance. I needed light. I needed anything that wasn't that. I turned and ran. I didn't go to my car. The lot felt too open, too exposed. Instead, I ran down the sidewalk, past the laundry room, past the pool gate, toward the main road. My breath came in ragged bursts. My chest burned. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station at the corner, the bright, normal one with cameras and a clerk behind bulletproof glass. I burst inside, panting, eyes wild. The clerk stared like I was about to rob him. I need help, I managed. There's someone. The bell chimed behind me. I froze. Slowly, I turned. The man in the suit was standing in the doorway of the gas station, just like the first time, like he'd stepped out of a loop. No one else reacted. The clerk didn't look at him. The two customers at the snack aisle didn't even glance up. It was like he wasn't there for them, only for me. He took one step inside. The bell chimed again, too loud. The clerk blinked at me. You okay, man? I couldn't answer. My eyes were locked on the man. He raised his hand, palm up, patient. Come back, he said. Voice barely above a whisper. And the worst part was the feeling that came with those words. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. Like a part of me, deep and old, knew that I'd been running from this longer than my life made sense for. Like this wasn't the first time I'd tried to escape. Like this wasn't even the first life. I backed away until my shoulders hit the drink cooler. Bottles rattled behind me. The man tilted his head. "You can keep running," he said, "but you'll get tired." The clerk spoke again, louder. "Hey, seriously, you need me to call someone?" I tore my eyes off the man long enough to look at the clerk. His face was normal, concerned, real. "Yes," I said, voice shaking. "Call the police." The man's lips twitched. Not a smile, but something close. "They can't arrest an open door," he murmured. The clerk picked up the phone, dialed. His voice sounded distant, like it was coming from the end of a tunnel. I watched him talk, watched him nod. Then, very slowly, the man in the suit stepped backward, out of the doorway, and vanished. Not walked away, not faded, just gone. The police arrived 10 minutes later. 2 officers, one older, one younger. They listened to my story with that same careful blankness Curtis had warned me about. The look people give you when they're deciding how much of your panic is real and how much is something they can dismiss as drugs or mental illness. They took my information. They drove me back to my apartment complex. They walked the stairs with me. They checked the door. It was locked. They went inside with their flashlights, sweeping the rooms like they expected to find a burglar. The apartment was empty, exactly how I'd left it. Except, in the kitchen sink, where I'd dissolved the card, there was a small pile of wet paper pulp. The older officer poked it with a pen. "What's that?" My stomach turned. "It's nothing," I lied. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he stood up, wiping his hands on his pants like the sink had been dirty in some way that wasn't physical. "Lock your doors," he said. I did. He didn't respond to that. He just nodded at his partner and headed out. After they left, I sat on the floor of my living room with all the lights on. I didn't know what to do. Curtis said, "Don't feed it. Don't participate." But what did that mean when it could open your door from the inside? When it could follow you into a public place and make everyone else blind to it? I stayed awake until sunrise, watching the windows. Nothing happened. No knocks. No texts. By mid-morning, exhaustion hit me like a wave. I must have fallen asleep on the couch because the next thing I remember is waking up to my phone buzzing again. Unknown number. No message, just a photo. It was me, sleeping on my couch, taken from inside my apartment. My blood went cold. I sat up so fast my neck cracked. I spun around, scanning the room. Empty. I ran to the bedroom. Empty. Closet. Bathroom. Nothing. But the photo was real. The timestamp was from 15 minutes ago. I didn't pack. I didn't plan. I didn't call anyone. I just left. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my phone charger. And I walked out of the apartment like my life depended on not being there when night came again. I drove without a destination. Just away. Highway miles piling up under my tires. I kept expecting to see him on the shoulder, standing under some random overpass light, waiting. I didn't. But the farther I drove, the heavier my chest felt, like running only made the leash tighten. By evening, I reached a small town I'd never been to, a place with a motel sign buzzing beside the road, and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. I checked in under my real name, because at that point I didn't think it mattered. If it could take pictures inside my apartment, it didn't need a registry to find me. The motel room smelled like bleach and old carpet. I sat on the bed and stared at the walls, trying to convince myself that new walls meant new rules, that maybe, in a place where no one knew me, it would lose interest. I turned the TV on for noise. I ate stale chips from the vending machine. I kept the lights on. At 2:47 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Not the frantic knock of someone who needs help. Not the polite knock of a guest at the wrong room. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at the door like it was an animal that might spring. The knock came again. Knock. 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 My phone buzzed on the bed. Unknown number. A single word. Open. I squeezed my eyes shut, hard, like I could force myself back into sleep, back into a world where logic still mattered. When I opened them, the room looked the same. The TV flickered quietly. The air conditioner hummed. The door stood there, plain and closed. Then the peephole darkened. A shadow passed across it, slow and deliberate, like someone leaning in to look through. I slid off the bed and crouched behind it, heart hammering. I didn't want to see his face. I didn't want to confirm it. Because confirmation felt like participation, and participation felt like losing. The handle on the door turned. Slowly. The latch clicked, and the door began to open from the outside. I don't know why I didn't scream. Maybe I couldn't. Maybe some part of my brain knew screaming wouldn't change anything. It would only announce fear. Feed it. The door opened a few inches, then stopped. Silence. I waited, shaking behind the bed, listening for footsteps, for the soft drag of a suit coat, for that raspy breath. Nothing. After what felt like forever, the door closed again with a gentle click, like whoever had opened it decided to be polite. My phone buzzed one more time. Unknown topo number. A photo. It was the motel hallway, taken from right outside my door. The door number visible. Under it, a line of text. Not yet. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just stalking. It wasn't just harassment. It was patience. It wasn't trying to scare me into leaving. It was teaching me something. It was showing me that it could reach me anywhere, anytime, and that it didn't have to rush. And in that moment, crouched behind a motel bed, I thought of what Curtis had said about feeding it, about attention, about fear, about participating. And I understood the trap. Running was participation. Looking for answers was participation. Even tearing up the card was participation. Everything I'd done since the first night at the gas station had been me turning toward it. Even when I thought I was turning away, I stayed in that motel until morning, then drove again. More miles, more towns, more cheap rooms. A week went by like that, and somehow I didn't get fired from my job because I was too afraid to check my email. I stopped answering calls. I stopped responding to texts from friends. I became a ghost while still alive. And then, on the 8th day, something changed. I pulled into a rest stop just after sunset. I needed gas, needed coffee, needed to use the bathroom. The rest stop was busy, families coming and going, truckers stretching their legs, the constant churn of headlights in the lot. For the first time in days, being around people made me feel safer, like whatever was hunting me wouldn't step into the light of so many witnesses. I was wrong. I walked into the bathroom, head down, trying not to make eye contact with anyone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of disinfectant burned my nose. I went into a stall, locked it, and sat there for a second, just breathing. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, stopping right outside my stall. I held my breath. A shadow appeared on the tile floor, stretching under the door. Too still, too tall. A voice came, low and close. Doors, it said, like it was savoring the word. Stalls, rooms, cars. You think they're barriers? My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. You hide behind them, the voice continued, calm. But you keep opening them, over and over, for air, for light, for help. The stall door trembled as something touched it lightly, like a fingertip tracing the metal. And every time you open one, the voice whispered, you invite me in. I squeezed my eyes shut and pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. It felt like the voice was inside my skull, echoing off my thoughts. Then the footsteps moved away. I waited until I couldn't stand it anymore, until my lungs screamed for air. I stood up, shaking, and unlocked the stall. I pushed the door open and stepped out. The bathroom was empty. No one. No shadow. No suit. But on the mirror above the sinks, written in something dark that looked like wet ink, was a message. "You're learning." I stumbled backward, almost slipping on the tile. I ran out of the bathroom and into the open air, gulping in the cool night like it could clean the feeling out of me. People passed me, laughing, talking, carrying snacks. None of them looked at me like anything was wrong. And that was the second trap. Isolation. If no one else could see it, then no one else could help me. And if I tried to tell them, I'd just sound insane. That night, sitting in my car with the windows up, I made a decision. I was done running. Not because I felt brave, not because I wanted to confront it, but because I finally understood that movement was part of the game. It kept me reactive. It kept me tired. It kept me opening doors. So I went back to the beginning, back to Route 9. It took me 2 days to work my way back. When I finally pulled into the old gas station lot, it was nighttime. Of course it was. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the station's fluorescent lights made the pavement look gray and dead. The sign out front buzzed, missing letters, so it read, G-S-S-T on. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. Then I got out and walked inside. The bell chimed. Curtis looked up from behind the counter, and the second he saw me, his face tightened like he'd been expecting this. "You shouldn't have come back," he said again. But this time, it sounded less like advice and more like resignation. "I need to end it," I said. Curtis stared at me. "You can't." "Then tell me what you know," I said. "All of it." Curtis hesitated. Then he leaned forward. "There's a place," he said, voice low. "Not far. Old road. People don't go there. They used to, a long time ago, when they needed to get rid of things they couldn't explain." I swallowed. "Get rid of what?" Curtis's eyes flicked toward the window. "Problems," he said. "Worries. People." My skin went cold. "You mean a cult?" Curtis shook his head. Slow. "No, not like that. More like a habit, a tradition. Towns like ours have ways of cleaning themselves." He reached under the counter and pulled out a folded map, not a printed one, a hand-drawn thing on old paper, creased and stained. He slid it toward me. "If you're going to do something stupid," he said, "at least do the right stupid thing." I opened the map with trembling fingers. A single route was marked in dark ink, leading off the main road into a patch of blank space. No names, no landmarks, just a line ending at a small circle. "What's there?" I asked. Curtis didn't answer. He just said, "When you get there, you'll know." I wanted to ask more. I wanted a guarantee. But Curtis's expression told me there weren't any. Only choices. I left the gas station and drove with the map on the passenger seat. The road narrowed as I went, the streetlights disappearing, the trees closing in. The air felt heavier, like humidity even though the night was cool. My headlights caught road signs that looked old enough to be forgotten, arrows pointing to places I'd never heard of. After 20 minutes, the pavement ended. Dirt road. Gravel. The car bounced and rattled, every sound amplified by my nerves. My phone buzzed once. Unknown number. A single message. Good. I didn't look at it again. The road kept going, winding deeper. The trees grew thicker. The darkness seemed to press against the windows. Then I saw it. A gate. 2 wooden posts, weathered and cracked, connected by a chain that hung loose. The gate itself wasn't closed. It was open, like it had been waiting for someone to arrive. Beyond it was a narrow path leading into the woods. My hands shook as I killed the engine. The silence that followed was deep, unnatural. No crickets, no distant traffic, no wind, just me and the dark. I stepped out and the air felt colder, like the temperature dropped the moment I crossed the threshold. My headlights cast long beams into the trees, but the forest beyond swallowed light like it was hungry. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment, more for comfort than usefulness, and walked through the open gate. The path was narrow, overgrown. Branches snagged my sleeves. The ground was uneven, and the smell of damp earth rose with every step. I followed the path until the trees thinned and opened into a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a door. Not a door attached to a building, just a doorframe standing upright in the dirt. Weathered wood, peeling paint. A brass knob dulled with age. It looked impossible, like a prop in a cheap haunted house. But it was real. Solid. Casting a shadow under the moonlight. I stood there, staring, unable to move. On the ground in front of the door was a circle of stones, arranged carefully, like a boundary. And within the circle, scattered like leaves, were scraps of paper. Hundreds of them. Torn pieces. Shredded notes. Fragments of photographs. Cards with faded ink. My breath caught. The card. I stepped closer, flashlight beams sweeping over the scraps. Some of them had words still visible. Names. Dates. Simple messages like, "Help me," or "I'm sorry," or "Don't open it." Each piece felt like a confession. And then I felt it. That cold pressure between my shoulder blades. I didn't need to turn around to know he was there. The man in the suit stepped into the clearing behind me, his footsteps soft on the dirt. "You came back," he said, almost pleased. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt like sand. "What is this place?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked past me, slow, and stopped in front of the doorframe. He lifted one hand and rested it lightly on the knob. "You keep thinking doors are objects," he said. "Wood, metal, locks, hinges." He turned his head just enough for me to see the edge of his profile, the curve of his cheek, the darkness where his eyes should catch light. "They're not," he continued. "They're choices." My hands clenched into fists. "Why me?" He was quiet for a moment, as if considering. "Because you noticed," he said finally. "Because you remembered. Because you kept the card." I stared at the doorframe, at the circle of stones, at the scraps on the ground. "So this is where people come to—" "What? Get rid of you?" The man's voice softened, almost amused. "Get rid of themselves," he said. A chill ran through me. "What does that mean?" He tapped the knob gently. Once, like a knock. "It means they get tired," he said. "They get scared. They get lonely. They want it to stop so badly they finally do what they always do." He turned fully toward me now, and for the first time I saw his face clearly. It wasn't monstrous. It wasn't rotting. It wasn't deformed. That would have been easier. It looked ordinary, in a way that made my stomach twist. Like if you saw him in a crowd, you might forget him a second later. Like his features were meant to slide off your memory. But the eyes weren't ordinary. They didn't reflect light. They didn't move the way eyes should. They were still, deep, and wrong, like windows into a room that had no end. He held out his hand. "Open it," he said. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I shook my head. "No." The man's head tilted slightly. "You already know what happens if you don't," he said. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. I didn't need to look. The air itself felt like a notification. I forced my feet to move backward, away from the door. "I'm not doing it," I said, voice shaking. The man's expression didn't change, but the clearing seemed to darken around the edges. The trees leaned inward. The silence thickened. "You came here for an ending," he said. "This is where endings happen." I backed up until my heel hit a stone in the circle. The moment my foot touched it, something shifted. The air snapped colder. My ears popped like I'd changed elevation. The flashlight beam flickered. The man's lips curled slightly, not a smile, but something like satisfaction. "You stepped in," he said. "That counts." Panic surged through me. I stepped back out of the circle immediately, but the feeling didn't go away. It was like crossing the stones had marked me. The doorframe creaked softly, though there was no wind. Then the door, the impossible door, opened by itself. Not slowly, not dramatically, just swung inward like it had been waiting for permission. Beyond it wasn't the woods on the other side. It was darkness. Not normal darkness. Not the absence of light. A depthless black that looked thick, like you could fall into it and never hit bottom. The smell that came out of it was familiar. Old paper, dust, metal, and something else. Faint, but unmistakable. Like the inside of a long, closed room where someone had been breathing. My legs trembled. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body felt pinned by the sight of it. The man in the suit stood beside the door, one hand forward resting on the frame. "Do you hear them?" he asked. At first I didn't. Then, faintly, like a radio station between frequencies, I heard voices, whispers. Not one voice, many, overlapping, murmuring, crying, pleading. Some sounded close. Some sounded far away. Some sounded like they were right behind my ear. My throat tightened. "What is that?" The man's head tilted, listening like he enjoyed it. "People who wanted it to stop," he said. My stomach turned. "You're killing them." He looked at me, and the stillness of his eyes made me feel like I was being weighed. "No," he said softly. "They're choosing." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes from fear and something like rage. "That's not a choice." He stepped closer. The cold radiating from him made my skin prickle. "It's always a choice," he said. "Open the door. Don't open the door. Keep running. Stop running. Tell someone. Don't tell someone." His voice lowered. "You've been choosing since the first night." I wanted to scream at him, to deny it, to call him a liar. But I remembered every moment that had led here. Every time I'd turned toward the unknown out of curiosity. Every time I'd checked the peephole. Every time I'd opened a text message when I knew it would hurt me. He was right about one thing. I kept opening doors. The whispers from the darkness grew louder, not in volume, but in clarity. I could almost make out words. Names. The way someone says your name when they love you, when they're scared, when they're trying to find you in a crowd. Then I heard a voice that didn't belong. My mother. Not a memory. Not imagination. It sounded like her, calling my name from inside that black space, voice trembling like she was lost and cold. "Please," the voice whispered. "Help me." My heart cracked. "Mom?" The man watched me carefully, like a scientist waiting for the reaction. "Don't," I said, voice breaking. He didn't move. He didn't need to. My feet shifted forward on their own. I stopped myself, shaking. "That's not her." The man's expression stayed neutral. "It could be," he said. The voice came again, closer. "Please. I'm here. Please." Tears spilled down my face. My hands shook so badly I could barely keep hold of the flashlight. I wanted to help. I wanted to believe. I wanted so badly for there to be a reason, a logic, a reward at the end of this nightmare. And I realized that was the real door. Hope was the hinge he used. I forced myself to breathe, slow and deep. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I didn't look at the darkness. I looked at the man. "You're lying," I said, voice low. For the first time, something like irritation flickered across his face. I took a step back. "You want me to open it, because that's how you win. That's the whole thing." The man's head tilted again, but not in curiosity, in calculation. I kept talking, because if I stopped, the whispers might pull me forward. "You feed on attention, right?" I said. "Fear, curiosity. But you also feed on people needing answers." The man's hand tightened slightly on the doorframe. I swallowed hard. "So here's my choice." I lifted the flashlight and aimed it directly into his face. The beam should have made him flinch. It should have made him squint. It should have reflected in his eyes. It didn't. The light seemed to bend weirdly around him, as if his features absorbed it. But I kept it there anyway, like a challenge, like the simplest form of defiance. "I'm not opening it," I said, "and I'm not running anymore. I'm leaving this place, and I'm not going to look back." The man's voice dropped. "You won't make it to the gate." I nodded, as if I agreed. "Maybe not," I said, "but that's still my choice." For a long moment, nothing happened. The whispers continued behind him, seeping out of the open door like breath. Then the man stepped aside, just slightly, giving me a clear path past him. An invitation. A test. My skin crawled. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and walked around the circle of stones, careful not to step inside again. My legs felt numb, but I forced them to move, one step at a time, toward the path back to my car. The whispers followed me, fading as I moved away from the doorframe. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. Behind me, the man spoke one last time, voice calm and certain. "You'll open another one," he said. "Eventually." I kept walking. The branches snagged my sleeves again, but I didn't stop to free them gently. I tore through them, bleeding, not caring. The gate appeared ahead, open like a mouth. I crossed through it and saw my car waiting in the dark, headlights reflecting faintly off the windshield. Relief surged so hard it made me dizzy. I reached the car, yanked the door open, and climbed inside. My hands fumbled with the keys. For a terrible second, the engine didn't catch. My breath hitched. My fingers slipped on the key. Then the engine turned over. I drove. I drove fast enough that gravel sprayed behind me. The dirt road rattled the whole car, but I didn't slow down. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. I didn't stop until I saw lights. I didn't stop until the sky started to lighten at the edge of the horizon. And when morning finally came, nothing chased me. No texts, no photos, no knocks. For the first time in weeks, my phone stayed silent. Days passed. Then weeks. I went back home. I quit my job. I moved again, this time without telling anyone where. I changed my number. I deleted my social media. I became careful in ways I never used to be. Not paranoid exactly. Just aware. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear a knock. Not on my window, not on my door. Just in the back of my mind, like a memory tapping to be let in. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. And sometimes I wake up convinced there's a text on my phone, a photo waiting to be opened. There never is. But I don't think that means it's gone. I think it means it's patient. Curtis was right about that. The worst part isn't being chased. The worst part is knowing that somewhere, in some dark patch of woods off a forgotten road, there's a door standing upright in the dirt, waiting for the next person who gets tired, the next person who wants answers, the next person who thinks opening it will end things. Because it will. Just not the way they hope. And if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt that strange weight in a place you can't explain, if you've ever seen a figure that doesn't make sense, if you've ever gotten a message that made your blood run cold, do yourself a favor. Don't engage. Don't investigate. Don't feed it. And whatever you do, when you find a door that doesn't belong anywhere, don't touch the handle. Some warnings are meant to be taken seriously, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Thanks for listening, and for spending your time here with me. Get some rest, keep yourself safe, and if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're listening. Good night.